Welcome back, guys. I'm reporting from the FIDE World Cup in India, Goa. Today the round number 2 has started and I'm analyzing my first game from this match against Grandmaster Yangyi from China. In case you missed the recaps from round number 1, I was able to advance since I won my match 1.5 to 0.5 against Grandmaster Constantin Lupulescu, where I was the underdog by rating, so that was already kind of a pleasant small surprise that I was able to advance there. And yeah, now in round number 2, many of the top seeds, you could say, I don't know how many it is, like maybe 20, 30 of them only enter from round number 2. So the highest rated players in the tournament don't need to play the first round, but they can only enter in the second round. The same also goes for my opponent, Grandmaster Yangyi from China, who is an absolute world-class player. As you can see now, his rating is 27-26. He used to be, I'm quite sure, top 10 in the world. His peak was somewhere in between 2760 and 2770. A chess prodigy. I think he became a grandmaster with 14. And yeah, since then he's in the world elite for as long as I can basically remember. Even though he's not even so old, I think he's like 31. So there's still a future in front of him as well. Anyway, today I had my first game against him. I think it's a nice thing to spoil the result already again in this whole World Cup series, just so I can explain some of the thoughts behind it. I managed to make a draw today. After an extremely long fight, I'm not sure if we were the last game or if Wesley So was the last to finish. Anyway, the two of us, Wesley So against Remaveicius and myself against Yangyi, were playing close to 6 hours, and yeah, it was a very tiring game. It's already now, let me check, it's 10:30. So I still need to do some preparation after that as well. But obviously I'm very happy that I was able to save a draw after such a long suffering, especially, as you will see. So I think I already gave quite a good introduction to my opponent, Yangyi, who obviously is the clear rating favorite in this match. And especially with the white pieces, it was quite clear to me that he was very, very ambitious to keep on playing until the very end. He opened up with c4, I went knight f6, and he played d4, which was a bit surprising to me, because typically if you go c4, after knight f6 you go either knight c3 or g3. So after d4 I played e6, transposing to sort of some 1d4 main lines. He played knight c3, bishop b4, I went for the Nimzo Indian. And we have another funny transposition after knight f3, now I played d5. What was kind of interesting was his time spent overall here. Like, as you can already see that for knight f3 he did spend like 2 to 3 minutes. He has played that as well. After short castle bishop g5, I remember seeing some game of him, so I did not want to enter this line, but instead I just transposed to the Rogozin, which, as some of you might know, is also the topic of my Chessable course, which I'm already working for a very long time, but I hope that I'm going to be able to record the videos still this year. The PGN files are already finished for that one. And the funny thing is that in this game, actually, my recommendation came until a pretty long point, and I was able to equalize quite comfortably with that. He took on d5, e takes d5, bishop g5. This is kind of the classical main line. White could also play bishop g5 immediately. Of course, there are many, many ways for white to continue from here on. But he went for this, h6, bishop h4, short castle, and now after e3, bishop f5. So all of this is quite a big theory. Bishop f5 is important, otherwise white can get bishop d3. And in this type of Carlsbad structure, black should play quite quickly, because otherwise the bishop on b4 would be misplaced in those type of positions. It would rather be on e7 mostly. Like if you would go for c6 here, very slowly, bishop d3, the bishop would at some moment probably anyway have to go back to e7 or d6, and then black just loses a whole tempo compared to some classical Queen's Gambit variations. So bishop f5, he went for queen b3, which I think next to bishop e2 is the main move. Now black sort of has to take on c3, give up the bishop here, and he went for the line with queen takes c3, which is possible. B takes c3 I think is played in more games. I also had one game against the Armenian Grandmaster Samuel Tersahakian here, in the European Team Chess Championship 2023. And the theory continues something like this here after c5. Not bishop e2, like I think white should take on... not c5 actually, is it knight d7? Bishop e2, c5, d takes c5, knight c5, queen b4. There's a lot of theory there as well. I think it's queen b4, but as you can see, I'm quite tired after the game. Anyway, he went for queen takes c3, and now I was spending just a couple of minutes to not mix things up, but I was like 100%, almost 100% sure that this was anyway the line. g5, bishop g3, and now knight e4. I have to play dynamically here. If I play something slow, he will just have the bishop pair. I think that some line like c6 and how was it, knight d2 and knight e4 used to be popular at some moment, something along those lines, but it turned out that white does have some chances to play for something in this endgame with some ideas with a4, a5, bishop e2, then maybe knight goes to b3, king to d2. White has some pressure on the queen side and also has ideas to play with f3, e4 or f3, g4 later on the king side or in the center. So g5, bishop has to retreat to g3, now knight e4, and he went for the move queen a3. Queen takes c7 is also possible, but it gives black sufficient compensation. Honestly speaking, I did not remember every single detail here during the game, but the position also plays itself pretty easily, I would say. I think that knight c6 immediately is the way you should go, and then rook c8. And black has sufficient compensation because of his lead in development, and soon also I will have ideas to enter with the rook on the c file. So he went for queen a3, I played knight d7. I was unsure about the move orders. I guess I could also start with c6, but I thought it shouldn't make such a big difference. He played bishop d3 here. I thought to remember that knight d2 here is a move. Generally this is possible in some cases to just allow black to take, and white has to take back with the king, but those positions can sometimes be dangerous if white is able to consolidate. And the king is not so weak here as it looks. White can play f3 to avoid any knight e4, and later on maybe play with h4. But also here in this position, like I would probably not even have to take on d2. Could maybe think about taking on g3 as well. But he played it very solid with bishop d3. Now I played c6. He went short castle. I thought all of that was very logical. And now I took on g3. It's also very logical, I believe, to play something like rook e8. But I thought that it gives white the option maybe to take on e4 at some moment. I was even quite sure that I checked something very similar for my chessable course. And it was also possible. I think I gave it as an alternative. But I wasn't so happy to enter some position with opposite colored bishops, and my king tends to be a bit weaker here. Especially Chinese players are very good calculators in general. I think the same goes for my opponent, obviously being a former top 10 player. So I did not want to allow any positions like this. Therefore, I took on g3, h takes g3, and queen f6. And I was quite sure that I've checked something very, very similar to this in my chessable course. I need to check it afterwards as well, but I'm very sure that some position like this was in front of my screen there. And I was quite sure that here I equalized. It's just a typical castbot structure with not so many pieces on the board. But white has at least quite a simple plan to play for this minority attack with b4 and followed by b5. I played a6, slowing it down. He played queen b3, preparing a4, followed by b5. And now I decided to take on d3, so that now his queen has to move again. I also thought it is possible to keep the tension here and play something like king g7 immediately, for example. But I thought that at some moment maybe he will take, and then I would need the queen on the 6th rank, like I was looking at things like this. And at some moment, if he plays b5, I thought it would be nice to have the queen here to defend the pawn on c6. So that's why I played king g7, a4, and now h5. So in this type of position, generally black is the one playing on the king side in most cases, and white is the one playing on the queen side, because white has an opportunity here to start the minority attack. Another typical idea would be to go for b5, but I thought that this was not so great here. For example, I think a5 would be a nice move. Now my knight cannot get to c4 easily, and the pawn on c6 would be weak. So I played h5, he went b5, I took, and now I went h4, which apparently is a mistake. It felt very logical to me to get counterplay there. I was thinking about the line which the computer points out, which is knight c5, generally quite a nice idea. There was also the same trick which I saw if I don't take on d3, but start with this, with king g7, a4, here, a4, h5, and if he goes b5 now, why is it not working? 8x b5, 8x b5, 8x b5, and now the same trick exists here. After taking, I can go knight c5 here, and then I'm winning some material because he cannot take back because of queen takes a1. So I saw this trick, and I also saw the idea of knight c5 here, but I was looking at queen c2, knight e4. I think the knight has to go there. Knight, of course, looks beautiful there. But in general, I wasn't sure about this position because I thought now c6 could actually be quite weak. I was actually not sure even if he would take. But it seems like I was looking at the line with the computer even that how was it again? Like even if I take on a1, rook takes a1, knight e4. At some moment there was even an idea to just sacrifice this pawn on c6, like here. Because I was worried about some position like this. Now knight d7 is an idea and c6 is weak. But the computer was showing just to give the c6 pawn at some moment. Let me see where exactly it was. I think I shouldn't take on a1, just knight e4 first, b takes c6, bc6, knight e5. Any move is 0-0 here, rook fc8, rook takes a1. Well, there was one pretty nice idea as well, which I wanted to show you. If, yeah, for example, like this, rook a8, rook a8. And yeah, that was it, yeah, knight e5, c5. I missed that. Just after those lines with knight e5, I thought I could be under some pressure. But I didn't see, obviously, this idea. And it's quite a nice geometrical trick to have knight takes g3 here. Otherwise, I would just be a pawn down, I guess. But now I gain it back, and this endgame should be quite a straightforward draw. There were also other options for me along the lines, like, for example, here, I think computer was even giving a move like g4, if I'm not completely wrong. Yeah, this is what I was saying, just to go for an endgame like this, when objectively speaking, black is holding. But yeah, I guess I made my point clear that I was just simply not so sure to play this Caspert position so slowly. That's why I went immediately for a counterplay with h4. He took on a8 now, which apparently gives some of the advantage back, but I think that was very natural. Obviously, he could take on h4 immediately, but he decided to play it like this and then take on h4. And I think very understandably, he now went for the move e4, because now I have the idea to go h3 next, and then he cannot recapture because the knight on f3 is hanging, and otherwise his king might also become a bit weak. I was considering other moves as well here. For example, queen e2 is possible to protect the knight. I thought that would be generally a bit more challenging than e4, because now a lot of exchanges can happen, and also the position can simplify a little bit. Here I think I played a nice move, knight f8. I don't think it's the only move, but I like the idea behind it, just to improve the knight, because it's not doing so much on d7 now, and I wanted to go to either e6 or to g6. And my king still does look a little bit weak, but I don't think it should be such a big issue, because I have many defenders and white doesn't really have that many attackers here. So as I was saying here, I think if he wants to play for something, he should definitely try something else except for e4. But obviously he was worried about h3 coming, so it was an understandable decision. And still he was able to press water from the stone later on, so I guess it's quite unwise for me to criticize that decision. So I played knight f8 here. There are also other moves like queen g6 did pop in my mind here as well, but after knight takes h4, queen takes e4, white does seem to have quite a lot of ideas against my king, like queen g3, and then the queen could come into d6. I didn't think that that would be a good idea. Also, taking didn't seem so wise, because after taking, then h4 is actually becoming a bit difficult to defend. I was also looking at queen f4 in this position, which also felt very reasonable. In the end, I decided not to play it because of takes, and now queen e3, but I'm quite sure that there should be some way for black here to equalize. Generally, those endgames felt a bit dangerous because this pawn is hanging, and unfortunately I'm not in time for a counter attack, because in the end I'm losing the rook because of knight f5 check. I'm curious how I can fully equalize here. I mean, I guess the computer says this is just a dead draw, yeah? Like, this is quite difficult for humans to understand. Also rook h8, but even something like rook e8 is apparently completely fine, to go for this pawn down position and just play for sort of compensation and put the knight to e4. And yeah, kind of similar to what happened in the game, but those endgames are not as simple as they may look if you have an engine in front of you, especially against someone as strong as Yangyi. Yeah, rook h8 is another option, but I was just not so sure here after king h2. It felt not so satisfying if king h3 is coming, but well, objectively it's a draw. Yeah. But I played knight f8, which is also a decent move. He went for e5. I think that was logical. Otherwise, if he takes, then, as I said, my knight will either go to e6 or g6. And once the knight appears on f4, I will also have some attacking ideas. So he went e5, queen f4, now queen e3. And now knight to e6. I think here going for this endgame would really not be a wise decision. Maybe the computer is also holding this. I don't have the engine turned on now. But here it looked very dangerous, because after knight g6, knight g5 is coming, and yeah, this is weak, rook f6 can come. So this did not look like a good decision. So I went knight e6 instead. He traded the queens. And now king h2, which was by far the best try in the position. This was the move I was also a bit worried about. Otherwise, if he takes on h4, then I can just simply pick up the pawn on d4, and I'm certainly not worse here. Those connected pass pawns could also mean something in the future. So king h2 steps out of that, and here I went knight g6, which I think was maybe a small step into the wrong direction already. My original idea was to go for knight to e6, which looks more active because you're going after the pawn on d4. But what I didn't like was rook d1, and now at first I was hoping for rook a2, but then I saw that king g1 just protects the pawn, and I didn't really see a great way to defend this pawn on h4, because if I go rook a4 now, then he can simply take, and I cannot take on d4 because of the fork on f5. Again, the computer is easily holding this with, I think this was okay, if I remember correctly, and then just some active compensation like knight f4. I think even this was possible. I think that was one line which the engine was giving, and just to play for activity like this. But yeah, that was a bit too deep for me. Also, I don't really see actually now what happens after rook c1 here. Anything, yeah, rook a4, rook a7. I don't understand anything here. Like, why should this be a draw after rook takes e6? I can just repeat like this. That's so easy, huh? Unbelievable. Then I just can take on f2, and all of a sudden everything is gonna make sense. Yeah, that was too difficult for me. I guess that in this position h3 is, you can't see that, because if white has to take with the pawn, then I actually have some target I can go after. But after some consideration, I went for knight g6. He went rook c1, now rook to a6, protecting the pawn. King h3, and now rook a2. My idea was that after he takes, I thought that the king on h3 might be a little bit misplaced, because I have some immediate ideas with knight f4 check. But the position, even though the computer is screaming zeros here, at least over the board, I was under quite a lot of pressure here, because, well, strategically speaking, white is a little bit better. He has the better pawn structure. My pawn on d5 can easily be attacked, and my pawn on h4 is also under attack. For a while, I defended pretty well. I went rook f1, rook to f5. I gave a check, which maybe was pretty unnecessary, because then I allowed his king to h5. And here I was all of a sudden really feeling the pressure, because he has quite a few interesting ideas, like e6 is possible, and if I take, then rook g5 could come. Knight g5 is an idea as well. And I started to panic a little bit. I went rook f1, giving up the pawn on h4. I'm curious if... Yeah, rook f1 was actually a very good move, objectively speaking. I'm curious, though, if there was anything easier at this point already. I mean, it's difficult to say this. It will probably all lead to the same, that black at some moment has to sacrifice this pawn, and then it's objectively a draw, which was also the case in the game. So I guess maybe there was an easier way, but now I cannot really find it quickly. So I played rook f1, pinning the rook. For a moment, I even thought that I blundered here because of e6. But then I saw that, first of all, I might be able to go for f6 here. And the funny thing is also that I might be able to take. And after rook g5, I have h3. I was calculating this for a little bit. Rook g6 and now king f8. And I thought that this should be a draw as well. Because if he takes, then I can take here. This is very difficult. I mean, he has, if knight h2, rook h1. Yeah, I was really not sure here. But anyway, I mean, I played rook f1, so anyway, I had to just wait and see what he's gonna play, and he didn't go for e6. Actually, f6 is the only move here, and it would have been quite a nice try for him. Because this is in fact losing. Let me see how. King f8. What am I even talking about? He has so many different ways to win. He just needs to protect the knight on f3. He can go king g4 and take king f4. That's really not so difficult here. So after e6, I would need to play f6. Knight takes h4, and then it's the same as in the game, just that e6 and f6 are included. And in the end, I'm barely holding, probably, on low depth now. Okay, 7, king f8 only move, or king g8. That's really ugly, huh? So, I mean, he really managed to create something out of nowhere, basically, and that's why I was saying earlier that, well, also here queen g4 is maybe a possibility, but I thought it wouldn't really matter because he could also go queen g5 here. But maybe that would have been smarter here, just to play a little bit more actively and not just go to a slightly inferior endgame. Anyway, I thought that it might transpose here, but I guess I have some extra options. I just have a better version, I think. After rook a4, knight f3, we had the same endgame, just with a better version for white. So that was surely a better alternative, and as I said, I think here knight e6 was just way more active continuation. Anyway, it was a draw after that, but it really started to feel uncomfortable around here. So he went for this, knight takes h4. As I said, e6 I think would be a great try, and I'm not sure if I would have found all the moves after that. He took on h4. I have to go rook h1. So that was, I mean, I saw knight takes h4 after I played rook f1. And I saw that I'm gonna have rook h1 after that. Provoking g3, and now comes the whole key move behind it. You might think at first that going to the rook endgame might be sufficient. I thought that this is extremely dangerous here, especially because white has this outside pass pawn. In the game we had this with the g pawn, and also there it wasn't great for me. But with this one, I thought that it should be lost quite surely. So the key move was knight f8. I think that was a very strong resource. It's also the only move that is still a draw at this point. And I was feeling quite confident here because now my knight is going to e6, his king is a bit awkward on h5, and now I can finally go after the pawn on d4 in peace. Or at least I thought so. He repeated moves for once. We reached move 40. I played knight e6, rook d3. By the way, there were a couple of funny ways for him to lose here as well. I saw one idea how white can lose. Let me think how it was. There was some way for him to get the rook trapped. I mean, obviously g4 also loses because of knight g6, but that's not what I was referring to. Yeah, I think it was rook g4 here, with the idea to play rook f4 next, but here knight e6 puts white into zugzwang. Actually, I spent like 10 seconds on this, and I was looking at rook f4 if this is actually lost, and I thought that maybe even this is going to be a draw. But of course, you should not really spend too much time on those things, because anyway, my opponent is not going to play rook g4 here. But it was a cool type of zugzwang here, so I like that. Anyway, he went rook f5, I played king g7, he went back with the rook, king h7, rook d2, and here I spent some time and went for rook g1. I was sure that it has to be a draw, but I was really looking for the most straightforward way, which I think was also my mistake at this point. Many moves are probably a draw here. I guess that something natural like rook f1 or rook e1 are quite simple, but yeah, everything is 0-0. Also my move in the game, rook g1. I was just a bit unhappy that I allowed knight f5 in retrospect, but it wouldn't have been a big deal anyway. Rook f1 would not allow knight f5, so I could also go for that. My point was, at first I wanted to bring the rook to e4 immediately. I guess I can even do that here. But I wanted his king to be on not so active here, and but yeah, maybe even, yeah, it looks like also this is even a draw, even with the king being active here, because this pawn on d4 is weak, and white cannot really improve the position, I guess. What happens after knight d6 though? That's a bit close. Now I have to go rook e3. Maybe rook takes d4 might also work, but rook f2 could be a little bit dangerous here. So I didn't really want to allow this knight here, so maybe that's why rook f1 could be a bit smarter. And after king g4, only now rook e1. And if knight f5, then I get the same with the tempo up, which maybe it also doesn't really make a huge difference anyway. So I went rook g1, he played knight f5, and now I committed this pretty insane blunder, knight g7, going into a rook endgame which turns out to be lost actually. Instead, I can basically make any rook move here. Something like rook e1, for example, will lead to something similar like we just had. But again, I'm seeing the 0.00 now in front of me. Like, you can believe me, during the game this did not feel like it. I mean, I'm a pawn down after all. Pawn on f7 is weak, pawn on d5 is weak. Obviously, pawn on d4 is the biggest weakness of all of them. But still, this is by far from a straight. This is far away from a straightforward draw, in my opinion, especially against an opponent like this. They will always manage to come up with some questions to ask here. So therefore, I made a mistake to want to that I wanted to force things and get rid of his tricky knight. And I had a feeling that the rook endgame should be a draw, but my feeling was simply wrong in this case. So he played king g5. I played rook f1 check, king g5, king g7. This is the position you can reach, and I generally thought that he cannot really make any progress because I can always go after this pawn on d4. He played rook d3, now rook to f2, rook a3, and rook d2. This was the whole point. Yeah, I thought he would play something like rook a4, and then I thought I have some options. I could bring the king to e7. I mean, maybe this is also lost in fact, but now it's actually a draw. So rook d3, g4, and king f8. And if I manage to bring the king to e7, then probably it should be a draw. Even though this also does look, yeah, rook f3 only move, also not easy at this point. I mean, very difficult. E takes f7, king takes f7, apparently a draw. Wow. But he started with rook a7, which was precise. King f8, and now he has only one winning idea, which he did not find. He played rook d7. After that, it is a draw. I'm not sure if he missed my next move or if he just didn't see the winning idea. I certainly didn't. Obviously, I calculated the move e6, and it turns out that this was actually correct. After e6, I have to take. King f6, white is threatening checkmate with rook to a8. King g8. And now at least I missed the extremely simple move rook to a4. This was just a complete gap in my calculation. I looked at everything else, like g4, rook takes d4, g5. rook f4 check, and then I'm just in time for this passive defense, and white doesn't have anything more than a draw. But I simply completely missed this move rook to a4, and after that it's lost. Even though here also like white needs to calculate this endgame, I guess. What happens after rook g2? I guess he has to take rook g3, king d5, and yeah, my king is a bit far away, but is this actually so simple? I hope I'm not blaming myself here that this is some extremely simple endgame, but no, I mean this is a draw here, so what did we miss here? So white needs to see something else here. Here white only has one winning move. Rook to a8 check first. King h7, king e6. And now in this exactly same endgame, I guess that the king is just a little bit too far away. King takes c5. King g7, and now with the king being further away, it should be lost, even though it's still not so easy, or is it? I guess. King c6 already a draw, rook c3. Gosh, I really need to work more on rook endgames. But actually the funny thing is I already had quite a few friends telling me that, and also some guys of you, that the rook endgame series was helping me. I mean, this is my second rook endgame here in the World Cup where I was completely lost, but managed to make a draw in the very end. So I should continue making this series for sure. Yeah, here something like rook a1 is winning, and then, I don't know. I guess just to cut off the king, I guess rook e8 should also do the job, yeah. And yeah, okay, now I guess it's sort of simple just to push the pawn, yeah. So this is what I missed, and apparently also what my Super Grandmaster opponent missed, that here there's rook a4, and after rook g2 there's rook a8 check first, which yeah, is not so easy to foresee, I would say. But he went rook d7, and now I was actually quite lucky to have this resource rook d3 at this point. The point is, if I take on d4, now this pawn on g3 is really important, because now he goes king f6 and I don't have rook f4 check. And then I'm either getting checkmated or this pawn on f7 drops and I just lose. So I was lucky to have the move rook d3, because now, well, if he takes on d5 like in the game, I can take on g3. And if he goes king f6, then I can give a check first. And the most curious thing is that if he goes g4, then I finally take on d4, because after king f6, now I have a check on f4, because I provoked him to go for g4. So he went to this endgame, and honestly, I was not 100% sure that it's a draw here, because I thought he might be in time to activate the king on the queen side immediately. And there was also one game in stage 1 of the World Cup. It was Petrov against Mkhitaryan, and it was those two pawns, not those two. But once the pawns reached there, and the king was also quite active there, it was already lost. But here, I guess that white just simply wasn't in time to fully activate the king. And from here on, it was always a draw. I defended it quite well, but it was very unpleasant, let me tell you that. I mean, this was move 50, and he really played until the very end. He tried everything he could, and yeah, I can briefly skip through. The most important thing was just not to run into any traps, and not to get too overexcited to try and force a draw immediately. I just have to stay and be alert, and be alert to his tricks and to his threats, and counter them. And always, whenever I can, try to give checks from behind, and not let the king on the queen side. Not let the king in on the queen side. Like, if I give just some random checks here, I could easily get into trouble. Like, for example, here. If I get into this, I guess that here I'm already lost, because king c7 is coming. So I need to be a little bit more careful. That's why I went rook d1, trying to cut off the king from the queen side. Yeah, he was just playing around a little bit. I gave checks whenever I could, and but I wanted to tell you one thing, one way how black could lose. For example, here, at first I was getting excited. I thought, wow, now I can force a draw with f6, even though it probably loses due to a couple of reasons. But I had the same position also with the king on e8. Here, maybe even taking here wins, because after rook d6, white can give a check and then go f7 next. But what I wanted to say was that king f5 is winning in those positions. And then after I take king e6, and then he has this this umbrella, as we call it, and I don't have any checks from behind. So I need to watch out about this, but yeah, otherwise I was holding it pretty well, I would say. Then he was trying to come from the other side as well, from the king side, but I did not let him in there as well. And I just needed to stay on the king with either e8 or d8. And yeah, okay. Let me just skip through this. Nothing that exciting happened anymore. And here he went king d3. It was already very close to being 50 moves. I think like 5 or 6 more moves, and then I would have just called the arbiter. So for some reason he went king d3, allowed me to take the pawn, and then okay, now I was finally quite happy that I was able to secure the draw. It was a very long game. We played almost until 9, so close to 6 hours, and obviously a very, very good result for me. I'm quite upset that I even let him enjoy his position so much. Like I really should not allow too many things to happen from this endgame, honestly speaking. But at least I managed to defend this endgame after that well. His win was also not so simple, I would say. But yeah. Anyway, maybe this was a good thing. Maybe my opponent now is going to be very upset, like it happened in the first match as well, and I'm going to be able to win tomorrow. We're going to see about that. I'll have the white pieces, which definitely is a nice thing for me. Anyway, that was it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the analysis. I will try to get some rest now and also some preparation. I can already see that the recap is getting quite long. It was also a very long game. So yeah, thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow, hopefully with some good news from the FIDE World Cup from my match against Grandmaster Yangyi. So thank you guys, and see you tomorrow.